Welcome to Capitol Hill Mixtape, presented by RIAA. I'm your host, Tom Cleese. Today we have the opportunity to talk to a longtime friend of the American music industry, Congressman Rodney Davis of Illinois. Congressman, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Oh, Tom, thanks for having me on. Always enjoy talking good music.
Absolutely. So before we dive into the music, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into public service, and maybe a few of the songs and artists that you were listening to when you first made that choice to get into public life?
Oh, wow. I can tell you, I got interested in government and policy because when I was young, my mom and dad, my mom was a high school dropout, my dad was a high school graduate, who walked into a fast food restaurant one day in 1959 and never left. And he worked his way up and ended up owning a few McDonald's franchises that moved me from Des Moines, Iowa to Illinois, Wheelerville, Illinois, where I live today. And I learned about politics and government and how decisions in Washington and in Springfield, Illinois affected their business. So I started getting interested in government and politics while I was a young kid in Taylorville, listening to Kiss in the late 1970s, to some of my favorite bands like Poison, Skid Row, and even Bon Jovi in the 80s. So it's really always been a part of my life. But I'll be honest with you, Tom, when I got into politics, I started working as a staffer like you did. And I was always the office metalhead, or the one who was still listening to the music nobody else wanted to. And now that I've been a member of Congress, I've gotten the chance to meet some of the folks that I used to idolize and see in concert myself. And it's really been a privilege to get to know how they're interested in policy making, how they see the industry, and also how now they see government.
That's fantastic. And I just have to give a shout out from one former metalhead staffer to another one. They just don't understand us, but they just don't get it. So if you had to narrow down when you're thinking about that, the work on the campaign trail, the collecting signatures, was there one song that you ever used to pump yourself up before going out and speaking to a crowd or anything like that?
I still do. You should see my playlist on my iPhone. And every day that I may be working out with other members of Congress, you'll see my AirPods in, and I'm listening to Bret Michaels. I'm listening to Poison. Ride the Wind has got to be my all-time favorite song. But I've also got country artists that are some of my favorites. Kenny Chesney, Jason Aldean. Also, I got a chance to meet Garth Brooks when he was honored by the Library of Congress, and some of the artists who came to see him. Some of the most genuine people in the world are in the music industry. And I can't tell you how I haven't met nicer people than Bret Michaels himself, Garth Brooks, also his lovely wife, Trisha Yearwood, and Lee Brice is one of the funniest humans I've ever had a chance to get to know. So my playlist is probably as diverse as one would think, but the number one song I use to get jacked up for anything is usually Ride the Wind, or one time in a debate. I'm a freshman member of Congress. I've got a tight race. I got one of the most highly watched races in the nation, and I'm in a debate, my first one with my opponent, who was their number one recruit in the entire country. And somebody called in and asked us what the walk-up song we would choose. I froze. And I ended up picking one of my other favorite bands, and I hope I get a chance to meet Scott Stapp, the lead singer of Creed, but I picked Higher with Creed, which is also one of my favorite songs ever and on my playlist. And my staff remembered that. So when I won that election that November, they had Higher playing as I walked up to give my victory speech. And it was pretty humbling to see that happen.
It's got to be an amazing feeling. We've had the opportunity to have you talk about music with RIAA in sort of this format before. And I know you've got a really great story about a time that you interacted with Bret Michaels. Did you want to tell a little bit of that story and how that came about?
The more I get to know folks in the music industry, the more impressed I become with their genuineness. And really, the perception does not ever come close to the reality of people. And we in politics share a lot of those same similarities when it comes to public perception and media perception. I'll flash back to long before I was a member of Congress. This was about 2004, 2005, I believe. My wife is a nurse, and my wife is a cancer survivor. She was diagnosed after being misdiagnosed with colon cancer when she was 26. She's 21 years cancer-free now, but she at the time was a home care and hospice nurse in our hometown of Taylorville. And at that time, our community had been ravaged by a cluster of neuroblastoma, a childhood cancer. And she had to take care of a child who was on hospice. He was 13 at the time. And this young man, his favorite band was Poison. And his parents let him get a tattoo of Poison at the time because, this young man was not beating that cancer. And my wife went in and was able to talk to him about the songs that they knew together. And he was so impressed. And afterwards, she came out and called me when I was working for another member of Congress, crying, and said, "Can you maybe get an autographed picture of Bret Michaels?" Well, you know what I did? I called my old friend, my former coworker, Morna Willens at the RIAA. And because of Morna and the RIAA, we tracked down his agent. And by the end of that day, I had forged a letter from my boss, Congressman Shimkus at the time, faxed it to Bret Michaels' agent. And by the end of that day, Bret Michaels had called that young man. He had talked to him personally, gave him his pager number to call him anytime. The young man ended up calling Bret Michaels, and Bret gave him hope and said, "You got to stick with me. I'm coming to Peoria, Illinois in a few weeks, and I'm going to send a limo to get you, and we're going to meet." Unfortunately, the young man didn't make it, but Bret Michaels sent a limo to get his parents, and his parents were able to talk about the love that young man had for Bret Michaels and Poison. And that really shows the humanity of the folks who are part of RIAA. And I'm just honored to have had the chance to get to meet Bret after that when he came to my district a few years ago. And he's just as genuine in person as he was to that young cancer patient years ago. And we talked about that story. He remembered it, and I got to go see him on stage after that. But I got to go see him again because he didn't sing "Ride the Wind" that night, and I'm still pretty upset by that.
Well, we're going to have to figure that out. And they say you should never meet your heroes, and it's so incredible when you can prove that stereotype wrong and find out that these people are just as incredible in person as they are when we build them up in our heads. So that's just so amazing, and thank you for sharing.
Oh, no, thank you. Along those lines, real quick, I've met some of my heroes in politics, and I haven't had as good impression as I did with Bret Michaels.
Yeah, that does tend to happen. Well, Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Is there anything before we conclude that you would want to plug that you're working on, things that you want to share with folks before we finish up?
Yeah, I will tell you, I've been blessed. I've been blessed to be able to work on issues that have essentially become law. And one area that I've really tried to focus on is the student loan issue and the debt issue that we have in this country right now. It's something that I hope the RIAA and its members continue to work on. And there's a provision that we put forth in the CARES Act that's already law right now that allows companies, it allows our businesses to begin to treat student debt like they can for tax purposes, tuition reimbursement. Start programs to help your employees pay down student debt. It's going to be a great recruiting tool for the best and the brightest to come into your industry. And you can allow them to help attack their student debt and the student debt crisis that we have in this country, and teach them how responsible companies and responsible business owners really want to help our young people get a grip on the crippling debt that we see in many of our families and many of our communities today. That's something that passed already. A lot of folks don't know about, and I always want to highlight it. So thank you.
No, thank you very much. As a millennial who went to the Hill after law school with all of that student debt, those programs have been a lifeline for me and for other people that I know who wanted to go into public service. So thank you very much for continuing to be a champion for that. Thank you so much for joining us for Capital Mixtape presented by RIAA. I'm Tom Cleese, and I'll see you soon.